The Detroit Lions offense is officially underway. With their coaching hires made, the new faces and new philosophies in the building, the Detroit Lions can now look forward. They can look at free agency. They can look at the NFL draft. They can look at the all-star games like the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl, and all of the other events to see and evaluate these collegiate prospects. And today, that's what we're going to be doing. As fans, we finally get a chance to start looking forward into the future, appreciate what last season was, but know that there's more growing yet to do. There are players to add, there are prospects to love, and there is a lot of college tape to go over. And today, we're going to take a look at the Senior Bowl, an event that happened over this past weekend that saw several NFL prospects raise their draft stock and several NFL draft prospects lower their draft stock. Some guys solidified themselves as first round picks, and some guys left the Senior Bowl with questions of whether or not they would be a top 50 pick at all. And today, we're going to be taking a look at some of those players, guys that the Detroit Lions are going to be keeping their eyes on, at positions that the Detroit Lions are going to almost definitely draft come April's NFL draft cycle, and just overall take a look and start getting familiar with some of the stars you're going to hear from now until April. So starting off, we're going to take a look at the positions that the Detroit Lions need because quite frankly, there aren't very many, right? You're not going to draft a running back if you're Detroit. You're not going to draft a quarterback. You're probably not going to draft a wide receiver very early. You're not going to draft, linebackers more likely than not, especially if you re-sign Derek Barnes. You're not going to sign or draft a safety early. Those things just aren't very likely to happen. Where the Detroit Lions do need to add some depth and talent is in the trenches, the edge rushers, the defensive tackles, and the offensive tackles. The Detroit Lions and Brad Holmes invested heavily early on in the trenches, right? Brad Holmes' first 3 draft picks ever were Penei Sewell, an offensive tackle, Ali McNeil, and Levi Onwuzurike, 2 defensive tackles. In the second round a year later, right, they took Aiden Hutchinson with the second overall pick, and in the second round drafted Josh Paschal out of Kentucky. They invested in the defensive line, and not a single draft has gone on where the Detroit Lions haven't invested in the trenches. It's not always early. Sometimes it's Colby Sorsdale. Sometimes it's Christian Mahogany. Sometimes it is Aiden Hutchinson, and sometimes it is Penei Sewell. But that investment needs to keep growing. Those picks need to keep coming in, and this year, especially with an aging roster, especially with the injuries and depth issues we saw a season ago, those picks are more crucial than ever. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson, there isn't a great second pass rusher. Outside of Ali McNeil, there isn't going to be a great defensive tackle beyond next season when DJ Reader is gone. So investing in those positions a year early, guys that can contribute right away but can grow into year 2, are really big opportunities for the Detroit Lions to continue to open their Super Bowl window. And they have the draft picks to do it. They have a first round pick, they have a second round pick, they have a third round pick, they have a fourth round pick, they have a 6th and 2 7th round picks going into this class. So they have the ammunition to address all of their needs. Taking a look at the first standout player of the Senior Bowl, Shamar Stewart, an edge rusher from Texas A&M, was one of the best edge rushers throughout the entire event. Standing at 6'5", 290 pounds, Shamar Stewart was a highly regarded prospect coming out of high school. He committed to Texas A&M with one of the best draft classes or one of the best high school recruiting classes to ever come to the school, right? That was the one that they spent millions and millions of dollars on. That was the one that had all those 5-star prospects and had Texas A&M ranked as a top 5 program coming into the preseason, despite not really doing a whole lot the season prior. There was a ton of hype, and a lot of it had to do, in particular on defense, with Shamar Stewart. Last season with the Aggies, he had 33 hurries, which was the highest mark of his entire career by an extremely wide margin. But the issue comes with the rest of his production. Throughout his 3 years at Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart totaled just 4.5 sacks. Very rarely did you see Stewart getting to the quarterback, and very often did you see him getting close, right? He impacted the throw a little bit. He got the pressure. He got the hurry, but he never got to the quarterback. He didn't take the football away. He didn't end drives with sacks. He didn't show up in big moments like you would expect a former 5-star prospect to do. And yet, he's still projected to be a top 20 pick. He's still projected to go well within the first round and be this year's Trayvon Walker. Now, taking a look at, his pros and cons, because of course there are some. His pros: the size, the speed, the power, the length, the bend, the run ability, the ability to defend the run. But again, when you're drafting franchise players, you're spending first round picks on players. Low production is scary. The development he saw at Texas A&M was not super high, right? His first season at Texas A&M, he played in 11 games. He had a sack and a half. His last season at Texas A&M, he played in 12 games. He had a sack and a half. Like, it wasn't a ton of development, and we didn't see that development show up in the stat sheet at all throughout his career. Shamar Stewart is almost entirely based off of potential, entirely based off of size and length and power and bend and athleticism, and very, very little of his evaluation is actually what he was able to do at Texas A&M. That, of course, is a big question mark, but at the Senior Bowl, he was arguably the most dominant player of all of the edge rushers. He was, again, big, fast, strong, showed off that power, showed off that length, and was super impactful all throughout the practices, stood out every single rep that he got. But again, the question mark is there of whether or not you're willing to put up with that production and potentially redshirt him essentially for his first year, knowing you're going to get 2-3 sacks out of him and banking on the fact that he develops in between years 1 and 2. A player that needs very little development that showed out at the Senior Bowl is Marshall edge rusher Mike Green, a player that stands at 6'4" and weighed in at 248 pounds at the Senior Bowl. That was massive for Mike Green. Coming into the year and at Marshall, he was listed at 6'4", 215. So putting on about 35 pounds was massive for him, and it didn't seem to slow him down even a little bit. Coming off of a career season where he saw 17 sacks and 23 tackles for loss, both of which led Division I FBS football, Mike Green showed out at the Senior Bowl. Just about every single rep he did went on a highlight tape. It went on Twitter. It went on social media because he was that dominant at the Senior Bowl. He was so dominant, in fact, that after the measurements and after the first 2 days of practice, he went home. He had nothing else to prove. He had nothing else to play for at the Senior Bowl because of how solidified his draft stock became. Mike Green came into the All-Star game, really ended the season as a fringe first-round pick, a guy that a lot of Lions fans and a lot of the media had going at number 28 and joining Aiden Hutchinson. After his Senior Bowl production, I don't think he makes it outside of the top 20. Mike Green has everything you want in an edge rusher: speed, quickness, bend, finesse, and the ability to stop the run. And unlike Shamar Stewart, he actually gets to the quarterback. Also played 3 years at the collegiate level, and his development was exponential. His first year, I believe, at Virginia Tech wasn't very good. He redshirted, he played very little, didn't do a whole lot there. Transferred to Marshall, where in his first season, he had 4.5 sacks and was impactful on certain plays. And then this year, he exploded. Again, 17 sacks, 23 tackles for loss, led college football in those statistics. And yeah, he comes from a smaller group of 5 school. He is a smaller, undersized defensive lineman, but we've seen players at 6'4", 250 be good edge rush. We've seen players smaller than that go out and do great things in the NFL. And I have no reason to believe that Mike Green cannot do the same thing as those other players. I think he will be even potentially as early as a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, but he made several millions of dollars this weekend, and he is going to be a great player for whatever franchise is lucky enough to select him. Moving over to the offensive side of the ball, one of the biggest standouts is a player that didn't even come from the FBS, that being Gray Zabel, the North Dakota State guard/offensive tackle who stands at 6'6", 305 pounds. With a 90.4 overall PFF grade, Zabel allowed just a single sack in 2024/2025. He was one of the best tackles at the FCS level, and he helped North Dakota State go to a national championship. Now, with his small school, with some of the question marks he has in his game, a lot of NFL scouts and a lot of the media project him to move inside. He played over 900 snaps at left tackle for North Dakota State a season ago, but in years prior, he played at left and right guard. He even played some time at center throughout his career at NDSU. And at the Senior Bowl, that is primarily where they had him, right? They had him as a guard. They had him playing center. But that versatility raises your draft stock. That ability to move across the offensive line and be a great pass protector raises your draft stock. The power that he displayed raised his draft stock. Now, again, the cons, he went to a smaller school. He is switching positions going into the NFL, and the tape of him playing guard/center is limited. But in the short time that he did it at the Senior Bowl, he was shutting down players from Georgia, players from Alabama, players from Michigan. He was doing really good things and looked fantastic. I'll show a couple of clips on the screen as I'm talking about it, but he was excellent. He was fantastic. He was projected coming into the Senior Bowl around, a middling second round pick, potentially an early third round pick. And I think he solidified himself as a top 50 selection going into April's competition. The last guy we're going to take a look at today is a defensive tackle, that being Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle from Toledo. Standing at 6'4", 320 pounds, Alexander graded out with a 90.2 PFF grade. His 9 career sacks and 23 career TFLs don't necessarily jump off the page at you being a fifth-year senior, but he did show out at the Senior Bowl. Being as big as he is, a lot of his question marks had to do with the quickness. He showed power at Toledo. He showed the ability to get to the quarterback as a defensive tackle, but the quickness, right? A guy that is 6'4", 320 pounds doesn't always have the best hands, doesn't always have the greatest quickness to get around the guards and around the centers. And over and over and over at the Senior Bowl, we saw Darius Alexander get by people with speed, get by them with power, get by them with finesse and technique. And I thought he raised his draft stock quite a bit. He came in as a pretty solidified day 3 pick. I believe PFF has him graded around the 140th-esque pick, which is pretty early on in day 3. I think with his performance at the Senior Bowl, you could potentially see him sneak in to the late 3rd round. But, I think that, that early day 3, that round 4 selection could be a prime spot for Darius Alexander to be. And with the Detroit Lions having that 4th round selection and potentially a 7th move up, they could be looking at him as an early day 3 option to move and add to their defensive line, add some pass rush, add some rotation, and especially if Levi Onwuzurike is gone, I think Darius Alexander could be a guy to replace that production. So with that being said, those are my 4 biggest risers from the Senior Bowl, guys that the Detroit Lions almost definitely have their eyes on. They'll be looking in the trenches. They love their small school guys. So guys like Mike Green, guys like Gray Zabel, guys like Darius Alexander are players that will be on the Detroit Lions radar. I would not be shocked if 1, if 2, if not 3 of these players ended up in Honolulu Blue come August. So with that being said, those are my biggest risers at positions of need. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought about the Senior Bowl, what your biggest takeaways and biggest rising players were. I know there's a lot more to talk about. There's a ton of other players that were standouts, and we'll get to those guys later. But let me know in the comments below what players you want me to talk about, what draft prospects you want to hear about. And of course, we'll keep making content, keep talking about those guys until the draft eventually gets here. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go live.